Hi, everyone. It's Judy Warner. Welcome back to the OnTrack podcast. We are excited to be with you again on the back end of Altium Live. Sorry, we've been dark for a couple weeks, but we've been busy putting on Altium Live. So we're glad to be back with you again and serve up some excellent guests like the one we have today, who is Cody Friesen, the founder of SOURCE. And you're going to enjoy learning about what they're doing and literally pulling water out of the air. So lean in, enjoy. I'll see you on the other side. Welcome to Altium's OnTrack podcast, where we talk to leaders about PCB design, tackling subjects ranging from schematic capture all the way to the manufacturing floor. I'm your host, Judy Warner. Please listen in every week and subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and all your favorite podcast apps. And be sure to check out the show notes at altium.com/podcast, where you can find great resources and multiple ways to connect with us on social media. Well, Cody, hi. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have you and learn more about you.
Excited to chat with you, Judy.
Well, I sort of stumbled across you, Cody, because one of your colleagues reached out to me, and we'll talk about that later. And then I looked into the technology, which, is your team is using Altium Designer to help develop this amazing technology. So before we get started, why don't you tell us a little about your background, and then we're going to talk about SOURCE and how you came to be involved in that company.
Yeah, sure. So I did an undergraduate degree in material science and engineering at Arizona State University. And then I went on and did a PhD at MIT in material science. Thereafter, I joined the faculty at Arizona State University as a professor of material science, and I've been there since 2004. And entirely across my entire career from the PhD on, really been focused in the sort of renewable energy space. Having started a battery company that took global and then founded SOURCE in late 2014.
So a little side note we didn't discuss before is material science. How do you end up going down that rabbit hole in life? What inspired you to go that direction?
Yeah, material science is cool because it's sort of the confluence of mechanical engineering, physics, and chemistry. And sort of if you think about those three spaces overlapping, it really is the predicate to, all of the microelectronics and, advanced materials that we use for aviation, for displays, for really everything in our daily lives. And so it's actually a really broad discipline across a number of factors. And my particular space is physical electrochemistry and surface science, which has sort of led me down a bunch of different sort of technical paths over my career. So that's how I got involved, because sort of like from the broad space. But sort of fascinating is when you think about the possibilities of unlocking entirely new, solutions to problem statements. Often the core is some materials advance, but the materials advance is really just table stakes. And then you need to surround that with often things like controllers and the ability to sort of, leverage microelectronics to enable those materials advances to really be deployed.
Sounds fascinating. Sounds like an area where you could really go broad and then choose where you wanted to go deep, which brings us to SOURCE. So why don't you share with the audience a little bit about SOURCE, what the technology is, and how you came to found this company?
Well, just starting one step earlier, as I mentioned, I've sort of been in the renewable energy space, and back during the Obama years, I served on the U.S. Manufacturing Council as the co-chair of the Energy Subcommittee, and during that process, really looking at the cost structure of solar PV coming down fast and lithium-ion battery cost structure coming down really quickly. And so from an innovation perspective, I was thinking about, where does renewable energy go? And so, when we all think about renewable energy, we tend to think about renewable electricity. But of course, 80% of our global energy mix is not electricity, but rather embedded energy and stuff, and in the food we eat, the water we drink, and so on. And so I started thinking about applying renewable energy, or the principles of renewable energy, to specifically water. And so the question was, could we do for water what solar did for electricity, in the sense that solar made electricity distributed infrastructure free, zero feedstock costs, right? The feedstock is just sunlight. Could we do the same thing for drinking water? And so that really led us down the path to SOURCE Hydropanels, which basically takes sunlight and air and produce drinking water effectively anywhere they're deployed on the planet with no input electricity and no input water.
It's fascinating. Well, one of the charities I think I mentioned to you that I absolutely adore is Charity Water. And do you have these stats? I know some of the stats are alarming about how many people in the world do not have clean drinking water.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So if you look at, and it is alarming, there's about 2.5 billion people that don't have good water to their home. So you're talking about, a third of the world's population, basically. And about 40 billion hours are spent fetching water on the African continent alone every year. And that's mostly by women and girls. So it's offsetting, of course, education and productivity opportunities, and not to mention just having agency in their lives. And then about one person dies from waterborne illness every 10 seconds on the planet. So this is a massive problem. And then we tend to think about, okay, well, it's in the emerging markets, but really, we have in the US over 1 million miles of lead pipe still in the ground. And we have 750 water main breaks a day in the US. And of course, right here in Arizona, where I'm based, the Navajo Nation, a full third of the population does not have water at their homes.
I don't know, it's actually just been the last year that I started learning about the statistics. And it's not only alarming the numbers and how kind of ubiquitous this problem is across the world, but we don't talk about it much in the public, in the town square. And it's just alarming. So anyways, when I came across the technology and watched some of your videos, which we'll share in the show notes below, by the way. Anyways, just something, that I'm very excited about, and that there's just a factor that we'll talk later about, that Altium comes to bear on the technology that your group is. So let's talk a little bit more. You mentioned Hydropanels. So can you discuss how exactly that works and what the mechanism is that makes that possible?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm a material scientist. So the way that we do this is using highly hygroscopic materials that are structured to basically absorb water vapor from the atmosphere passively. And these materials concentrate the water vapor from the air by about 10,000 times by volume. So the experience that you have in your daily life with something like that is, for example, when you leave the lid off of a sugar bowl and you notice that the sugar gets a little bit clumpy, right? It does that because that sugar is absorbing water vapor from the atmosphere. And so not sugar, but another material that does like that, but just does it very fast, is sort of the beginnings of SOURCE Hydropanels. We then use sunlight to respire the water vapor back off of those materials and internally passively condense that water vapor. We can do that basically anywhere on the planet. So I'm based, as I mentioned, in Arizona, in a very, very dry desert. And we're now in 48 countries around the world, everything from the Australian continent to the humid jungles of Ecuador and so on. So really a wide range of environmental conditions. And Judy, you and I could basically go set up a hydropanel in the desert and take about 15 minutes to set it up, and half an hour later get a drink of water. That ability means that we can then, just like with solar PV, array SOURCE Hydropanels in arrays of 2 up to thousands, depending on whether it's a school or a hospital or a hotel or a whole community.
That is amazing. It seems kind of a little bit of magic, right? You're literally pulling water from the air. What surprised me is some of the materials that I watched is that you're in Arizona. It's a very arid area, but it's not an area apparently how does that work in those arid, dry areas where it's very low humidity?
Yeah, so your intuition is right to think about humidity, right? Because you think about sort of water condensing on the outside of a glass of iced tea or water dripping off an air conditioner. But that's sort of direct condensation. And so you do need high relative humidity for that. But from a material science perspective, all materials come to equilibrium with whatever environment they're in. And there's water vapor in the atmosphere, even in the desert. And so we can still leverage what are called the psychrometrics of the atmosphere to basically equilibrate materials even in the desert. So And of course, what you're starting to indicate is that this is, when you say magic, right, it's simple on its face, right? Just think about that sugar in the sugar bowl. But to make that process really efficient, where we take sunlight on some cycle, right, and we utilize that with materials that have some set of properties with respect to water vapor in the air, and then we use the thermodynamics of water vapor in the air, and everybody knows about the dew point, relative humidity, and how that changes with temperature and atmospheric pressure and all those, barometric pressure and all those things. So all of a sudden this becomes a very highly dimensionalized problem, about 8 dimensions that we're solving for at every given moment of the day in order to efficiently produce water. And that's where it goes from being just a material science problem to a much more interesting embedded software, controls, electromechanical problem, where we're basically changing these variables to ensure that we're producing water very efficiently at every moment of the day.
Fascinating. So you mentioned electronics. So obviously the most critical thing here, that's related to your background, Cody, is the material science, right? You have to have sort of that canvas upon which to develop this technology. But the way that I learned about you was I found out that your team uses Altium Designer to develop some electronics that sort of unlocks the ability. So can you talk a little bit about that? What kind of electronics are involved and sort of how that comes into play?
Absolutely. So the thing that is critical to sort of lay down as the foundation is that this is a massive multidisciplinary problem. So I'm a material scientist, but we have computational fluid dynamicists, we have embedded software gurus, we have PCBA designers, we have this huge range of capabilities, not to mention the chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, and so on, that are all sort of involved in dealing with how we optimize SOURCE Hydropanels. On the control side, we have a number of inputs, so a number of sensors, everything from obviously a sensor related to what is the total amount of sunlight coming in, what is the relative humidity, what is the temperature, what is the state of the sort of recorded conditions over the preceding days, what is the anticipation of the upcoming day in terms of what the weather and the behavior is going to be. Then we take all of that information into a microcontroller that has embedded software on it that's running both a deterministic algorithm and a machine learning layer to basically then go set all the set points around how quickly we expose materials to the atmosphere, how much energy we impart to those materials from sunlight. The rates at which we're doing all of those processes are determined by that controller. So it's a sort of multi-input, multi-output type of problem statement that is actually kind of from a nerdy perspective is actually really kind of a fun one to work on.
Yeah, we like nerdy here, Cody.
We do.
And, something that I've sort of noticed since working here with Altium and engaging with people like you is, as you mentioned, these complex multidisciplinary, even from the point of being an electrical engineer today, you're asked to look at not just this one thing that you're working at, right? It's not this working in a bubble. You have to do, upstream and downstream considerations to solve a really complex process. And I see that, sort of on steroids, with what you're doing. So as you said, it looks simple on the outside, but it takes all these pieces, putting together to enable it. You mentioned that, your technology has been adopted in 48 countries. Remind me how many installations that is. And then can you talk a little bit about sort of what the feet on the ground impact has been in those areas where you have installations?
Yeah, so it's we're installed across sort of hundreds of types of applications. So everything from high-end hotels to an orphanage for Syrian refugees in northern Lebanon to indigenous populations in Australia, and so really, really broad set. And the way to think about that is, everywhere where people want to have perfect drinking water, which is basically every human, and where you might think about water stress being. So, an island nation where they're boating in fresh water because of saltwater intrusion to their water table, or to an indigenous population that has never had piped water, or to, for example, the Wayuu tribe in northern Colombia, where the women were walking 6 hours a day to go fetch water, and in an area that you think about Colombia is relatively wet, but this area is very arid. And so we installed an array of, I think it was about 150 panels that basically meant that those women no longer going and fetching water. So that ability to sort of put down the base layer of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Food, water, shelter, so that people can start to level up to education and those other things that they're held back by if you don't have that base layer. And just to cycle back to your comment about sort of the multidisciplinary nature of, the folks that use your software today, basically every technology that is going exponential, that really is having an impact in the world across a whole bunch of fronts is by definition multidisciplinary. Really the overlap, the intersection of electrical engineering, computer science, machine learning, material science, et cetera. When those things come together, that's where magic happens.
Absolutely.
To your point, and where something that approaches the Victor mousetrap, right? A piece of wood with some bent wire on it, doing the job that no other thing can do because it's so elegant in solution. When we can do that, make things look simple, make things look like magic, that unlock, that elegance comes from those intersectional solutions. All right. And so that's what gets me really excited when I see people doing work in spaces that are in that zone where no one person could solve it, because no one person could possibly know all of the things that you have to know to make a solution that really creates an unlock for problems that have existed for potentially generations.
Right. You're singing my tune, I will tell you. And to your point, one of my roles here at Altium, which we share this passion, is to work with students. And there's an organization, Cody, you probably know about it. It's called ECEDHA, the ECE Department Head Association, and I'm on their corporate advisory board. And I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and there was a guy from, I don't know, VP of Technology, Raytheon, and he was talking to all these department heads that are trying to get their hands around what skills and abilities do we need to give students that makes them completely relevant so their ramp to productivity, in the workplace is fantastic. So he put up a slide and I stole it right away, because he said, in the middle, here's your core competency, say, of electrical engineering, or you could pick another discipline. And he said, but we want you to know a little bit about embedded systems, mechanical, software, business, and he had this array. And he said, we want you to have touched and have some limited understanding of all these corollary disciplines, because then your ramped productivity and your ability to work as a team and value, the corollary stakeholders. So, at the highest level, like the defense of our country, this is the skill set. And I really latched on to that. And so I've given talks at other universities where I'm like, wake up, folks, you need to not stay in this one lane and think you're going to be relevant in the workplace. So I think projects like the one you're talking about, one, it does amazing things like bring clean water, and, life doesn't begin until we have basics like water. But you're sort of singing my tune where it's like, we need to equip students and startups and all of this with the sensibility that these are large, complex problems. And you don't have to be an expert in every area, but you need to know where to go get the information, how to build a team. And so I really love that. So let's go right there. So how I found out about you is a guy reached out to me that, who's Eric Leahy, to ask me at Altium, that there was this ASUIO competition, and, would Altium be interested in sponsoring? So, let's talk about that a little bit. So, basically he's asking me for licenses to help sponsor these teams. So I'm really eager to learn and to share with our audience what ASUIO is and why you think it's important and why you got involved.
Yeah, so I founded the ASUIO a handful of years ago. This is our 5th year running the competition, and which the website is asu.io for anybody who wants to go check it out. And what it is a entrepreneurial competition, student entrepreneurial competition amongst all colleges. Anybody's welcome to apply, and the competitors have to be student led. And the idea is to really be an ecosystem builder of students who are trying to start and build cool technology, hard tech companies, right? And there's very few filters other than you have to be student led and it has to be hard tech. And that means that basically every year we're giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars in prizes and in-kind support to these students. And from a Arizona perspective, the natural thing would have been to sort of make it an Arizona competition for Arizona students and so on. But, the MIT 100K, which is a competition obviously run at MIT, basically turns the entrepreneurial sort of startup calendar every year in the Northeast. And so I wanted to kind of take from that, really drive a bigger competition in terms of awards and make it sort of national level and bring the best minds to the table. And it's been really kind of a blast to see the students come through the competition.
Well, again, we have a lot in common there. So one thing I've gotten to do is go on site. We sponsor student teams all across the world, actually. And, on the back end of what I just said about industry reporting, they want these multidisciplinary students coming out is these are the kids that go on to do the best work. And then the universities, much like ASU and what you founded here, Cody, is these sort of incubators of technology, right? With the prize, these are the ones that change the world, right? And so kudos to you.
Yeah, sometimes it takes, it's not actually even about that startup working out, right? It's about the student and learning that entrepreneurial mindset, because, a student might take a class in entrepreneurship and it's all rainbows and unicorns, right? It's all like, oh, you get to define your own, job. Why go get a job and you can create your own job, right? You hear all these phrases that are very fluffy. The truth is that entrepreneurship is hard. It's a grind. It is not for everybody. But on that counterbalance to that, you are shaping the universe, right? You're changing the world by starting something. You're changing the world in some way that might be very small eventually, or at the end result, or it may be massive. But you are shifting. You're bending the universe a little bit, right? And so that counterbalance and learning that and seeing if it's for you is everything, because the more people that we can get that think outside the box, that think about bending the universe in their vision, the more shots on goal we have to improving the world. And so I think that by itself, getting students that experience of kind of running those laps is key. And of course, maybe one or two over time will become, a big deal.
And if they won't, Cody, they'll end up in industry. And when they go in, they have ninja skills.
That's right.
If they find out entrepreneurship is not for them, they still are qualified because of the experience to do amazing things inside the construct of industry. So to me, it's a win. It's a win all the way around.
100%.
Yeah. So out of ASUIO, Cody, what are some of the most sort of inspiring technologies that you've seen, over the past 5 years that have sort of spun out of this?
Yeah, there's some really fascinating ones. Here, I'll give you a little quiz. What do you think is the average age of an apple at the grocery store? From the point it was picked until the point it was placed in the grocery store.
Oh, 30 days.
That's not a bad guess. 14 months.
What?
14 months is the average. And so
From the time it comes off the tree till the time I eat it is 14 months.
That's the average.
That's crazy.
So you could talk about whether that's fresh fruit or not, and whatever else. But the fact is that when growers pick fruit, obviously fruit is ripe at a certain point in the year. And of course, there's different growing regions around the world to help us deal with seasonality. But it still doesn't cover the full 12 months, right? You can go in a grocery store and get an apple and most any fruit most months of the year. And that's because we have these large cold storage facilities all around the country, around the world. And one of the challenges, of course, you have these massive, we're talking millions of square feet facilities that they have to know when to pull the fruit so that it doesn't go bad, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a lot of guesswork. One of the competitors a couple of years ago, Stray Biotech, young entrepreneur, her name is Catherine Sizov. She developed an ethylene sensor, a little device that basically is cloud connected and that can go in every single bin that is sensing ethylene. And so ethylene obviously is a measure of how the ripening rate of the fruit. And so she can basically say that bin right there, bin 72B, right? That one's got to be pulled now. And so you can basically now dynamically know when to bring fruit to market. That's a huge thing. This is a young woman who, kind of had this idea, and she built this company. She then closed a $1.2 million seed after winning the ASUIO. Soundskrit, which is all about directional microphones, Sahil Gupta, and he's raised a $3 million round. Imagine talking to Alexa, and there's 7 people in the room, and they're all speaking to Alexa, and Alexa knows that it's 7 different people based on the directionality. And then the third one that I'll tell you about, which I think is just really cool, is Kyber Photonics. Josue Lopez, an MIT student, it's chip scale LIDAR. So instead of having the spinning mirror, it is a photonic approach, using CMOS type approaches that allows you to basically have in real time LIDAR without having to have a spinning mirror, because you basically have a lens that is able to segregate the information from all directions. Pretty awesome.
Yeah, I know students, that's what kills me is one of the things I've gotten to do is sponsor Hyperloop teams. And, it's held in Los Angeles and I'm in Southern California. So we've gone up and filmed these competitions, and we've been sponsoring a team, the Technical University in Delft Technical University. And these kids smoked the record of commercially funded companies, smoked it. Yeah. And they're students. Yeah. Sometimes I swear these kids, just because they don't know they can't, they just do it. And thanks for much.
Why did you guys decide to get involved in ASUIO?
For that very reason. It's a good question. Is from my perspective, Cody, I've been in the industry in the hardware electronics industry for over 25 years. And there's a trend that I'm noticing, and that is a lot of people that got involved with PCB design engineering, they're aging out. Right. And now EEs, 80% of all team customers are electrical engineers, right? Except PCB design and sort of having this multidisciplinary approach is not being touted in the traditional track of universities. So at Altium, we're the number one tool in the space. If a design engineer doesn't come out of university having touched PCB design, it will be a deficit. And not only that, we're losing all of our talent and all of the, the wisdom of the ages, right? And so we feel compelled that we are compelled by our success, right? To put tools and these skills in the hands of students, and it's programs like ASUIO that are doing that. So our job is just to come alongside you, Cody, right? And say, here's tools, here's training, here's, online resources. Let us help equip you, right? Through these inspired students, let it give what's need. And like I said, if they go do a startup, right, they're going to take our tool with them, and they're going to have, the top professional tool to do what they need to do. If they go into mechanical or something else, they will have touched it, they understand it, and they'll be effective on these multidisciplinary teams. So for us, Cody, we're compelled. We see what you're doing. We see these students, we love them, and we think they're the future, whether that is breakthrough technologies like bringing water to the world, right? Or LIDAR or perishable food. Like this impacts, like you said, bending the universe. We want to be, where these young, amazing students are bending the universe, and we feel compelled to do that.
I think that's so cool. And the thing that you just had my gears spinning on is, we've been hitting on multidisciplinary all the way through. You're talking about Altium as a tool. And one of the things that sort of is very unique to double E's amongst all the engineering disciplines is that the space is expanding at the rate of all the other disciplines compounded. Because, for example, new sensors come out to detect something new areas, machine learning, which is enabling sensors to become ever more valuable, new material science that need to be controlled and monitored. All of those pieces all funnel back eventually back to a PCBA, back to a microcontroller, back to, all of those pieces, all of those other disciplines are amplified, are enabled by
100%
electronics. So that's a super powerful thing when you think about a tool, the Altium tool, enabling those different vectors to become more valuable. So that's not a small thing.
No, it's why I get out of bed every morning. I love it. I'm so inspired by these students, and in turn, they're inspired by us, and it creates this engine. And to your point about, this all doesn't run without electronics. And typically in the world, we're all really wowed by semiconductors, microcontrollers, and how dense and fast and how many transistors are on these things. And they get sort of the limelight, as they should. They're fantastic, except unless you have, I have a friend that calls circuit boards little green squares. Unless you have a really effective little green square to put on, it doesn't go. And I just happen to have a couple decades under my belt of, realizing, working next to electrical engineers and going, oh my gosh, these guys are the unsung heroes, right? It sort of takes it all down to the base. And it's a funny little space, but I really love it. And it is foundational to all you're doing, Cody. And again, any part that Altium can be part of just unleashing, these students and things like you're doing. Well, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and just wish you all the best with SOURCE, with the students, and, bringing all that you have to bear in the world, and launching these students in next gen technology. So congratulations. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, Judy, thank you so much. And we've really appreciated what Altium has done for us at SOURCE, and what you guys are now engaging in on ASUIO. It's huge. And so looking forward to our long partnership to come. Thanks so much.
How can people get involved in ASUIO? Like if they want to compete, we have young engineers. If you want to compete, if you want to sponsor, if you want to, how do they get involved?
Go to asu.io and check out the website. Please feel free to engage in any number of ways through that website, and check us out on social media.
Wonderful. Okay, to our listeners, I'll throw all those links below to ASUIO. I'll put down some videos of Cody talking about SOURCE and some really inspiring things. And just know that, you, our listeners, are just on the front lanes of putting amazing technology like this on the planet. We really appreciate you, and we really appreciate people like Cody Friesen and SOURCE and ASUIO. Thanks so much for joining us today. Please remember to like, subscribe, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to serve up. We'll see you next week. Until then, remember to always stay healthy, stay safe, and always remember to stay on track.